The bizarre dancing plague of 1518 is one of the most notable dancing plagues of all time. Swarms of people suddenly became afflicted with the desire to dance. The plague of 1518 is among one of the most documented, but the dancing plague of 1374 is often overlooked amongst the chaos. To this day, not much is known about this strange affliction or why it started. On June 24th, 1374, the people of Aachen, Germany woke up and began their day. The residents sensed something was wrong and thick tension filled the air. As the day went on, they noticed small pockets of people dancing for hours on end. They realized that the dancing plague had finally hit Aachen. By the day's end, hundreds of people were dancing uncontrollably. Limbs flailed around as people tried to break the trance, but nothing worked. The dancing continued well into the night. By early light, those who had been dancing were exhausted, but they couldn't stop. Slowly, one by one, more people joined the dancing hordes. It then began to spread to other towns and cities, leaving Aachen amid a dancing plague. Months passed and the dancing slowly died down, but it was too late. The plague was infectious and would continue to afflict towns and villages worldwide for many years to come. Scientists and sociologists are still at a loss regarding the infamous dancing plague. One theory is that the dancing was caused by mass hysteria. Once one person was whipped up into a frenzy, others followed suit. Unless another dancing plague breaks out, likely we'll never know the actual cause. Number 9. During the reign of King Stephen, the residents of Woolpit, Suffolk, England, made a bizarre and shocking discovery. Legend has it that one day, villagers were walking around the village when they happened across two children, a boy and his sister, in a wolf pit. These weren't ordinary children though. Their skin had a green hue, and their clothes were made from an unidentifiable cloth. Neither of the children spoke English and blabbered out gibberish words. The villagers of Woolpit took the children in and tried to feed and warm them. The children refused every piece of food apart from beans. The villagers continued feeding the children beans for hours until they were satiated. As the months passed, the children slowly began to acclimate to their new environment and started eating bread. Day by day, their skin faded from green to white, and they were indistinguishable from the other villagers. Unfortunately, the young boy succumbed to illness, leaving the girl behind. With her brother gone, the girl became further entrenched with her new culture and eventually learned to speak English. She told the Woolpit villagers that she came from St. Martin's Land, where everything was green and dark. She had no idea how to get back to her home. According to the girl, she and her brother had fallen into a different world when they were in a cave. They were following their father and a herd when all of a sudden they got lost. The two followed the sound of bells faintly jiggling and ended up in Woolpit. The legend of the Children of Woolpit has persisted for centuries, and the truth behind this mystery has been highly debated. Is the tale of the Children of Woolpit merely a folk story, or is there really a St. Martin's Land filled with green people? Number 8. The legend of Prester John, the king who may have never existed, has been around for centuries. The first mention of his name is the text in 1145, although some sources state that it's earlier than this. According to historical artifacts, Prester John was an all-powerful man who won every battle he was in. Most importantly, Prester John was a key figurehead within Christianity, and he hoped to unite fellow Christians and return them to the Promised Land. In one manuscript, Prester John is said to have ridden out to the Far East in an attempt to win land back. For 3 days, Prester John and his army fought valiantly and managed to capture many areas. When all was said and done, Prester John had managed to defeat the kings of Media and Persia, which Christians had failed to do. His story became so powerful and influential that it was told during the Crusades to boost soldier spirits. The legitimacy of these reports has often been called into question. While there are written accounts for Prester John, nobody knows who he was. Was Prester John a real person, or a folktale that got out of hand? Number 7. July 19th, 1545, marked yet another day of fighting for the English. They were embroiled in the Battle of Solent against the French. who had positioned themselves close to the Isle of Wight. Hundreds of ships maneuvered around, trying to find the best defensive position. Once the ships were in place, men waited to take orders, and the fighting began. Amid the battle, one of the ships sank, setting in motion a centuries-long mystery. The Mary Rose was Henry VIII's favorite ship, and he wished it well on its voyage to the battlefront. As cannons roared and men screamed, something bizarre happened to Mary Rose. All of a sudden, it began to sink. There were no apparent signs of damage or leaking on the boat, which mysteriously sank below the water, taking hundreds of men with it. Some men found themselves trapped in parts of the ship, and King Henry VIII looked on as his favorite ship disappeared. An investigation was launched into the sinking of the Mary Rose, but no solid conclusions were made. In recent years, dive teams have searched the area but still came up empty. According to reports, the prevailing theory is that the ship was hit by a large gust of wind, causing it to topple. A surviving sailor later said all the weapons on one side had been fired, leaving the ports open. When the gust of wind hit, the water was able to get through the holes, causing the ship to sink. This theory has never been confirmed, and it remains one of many. Another view is that the French army hit the ship in a way that left little to no marks. Dive teams have searched the area several times, but no concrete evidence has ever been found to prove why the Mary Rose sank. Number 6. In 1483, the War of the Rose raged in England, each side taking hundreds of casualties daily. The War of Roses is incredibly well documented and is still taught in schools across England to this day. The war shaped the English landscape as we know it, but did you know that there's a hidden mystery within the war? During the War of Roses, Richard and Edward, the sons of King Edward IV, tried to have a normal life. The two walked through castle courtyards as their father fought a fierce battle. In 1483, their lives would change forever with the passing of their father, Edward IV. Naturally, the boys were devastated, and England looked on as a power vacuum opened. While the country waited to see who would take the throne next, others looked to Edward's family. Following their father's passing, their uncle, Richard III, Duke of Gloucester, became their sworn protector. With so much uncertainty and turmoil in the country, Richard placed 12-year-old Edward and 9-year-old Richard in the Tower of London for their own protection. Once their feet crossed the boundaries of the tower, they were never seen or heard from again. Richard III went on to take the throne, but where were the boys? Many believe that Richard III had a hidden agenda, and that the Tower of London was just a cover story. Some historians think that Richard III may have gotten rid of the sons, so that they could not claim the throne. Many years later, Sir James Tyrrell would confess to getting rid of the two boys, but he would never tell who ordered him to do so. The mystery of the princes in the tower prevails to this day. Number 5. In the 12th century, epic biographies and manuscripts began to spring up about a man named King Arthur. King Arthur was said to have been the king of Camelot, who possessed military prowess and unlimited power. No matter the battle or war, King Arthur could win, easily running down his opponents. The biggest story about King Arthur is his alleged win against the impending Saxon invaders. Reports of his colossal victory spread across England, as did tales of his infamous Knights of the Round Table. Many wanted to believe that King Arthur existed. It gave armies hope and confidence that they too could defeat oncoming armies. But did King Arthur really exist? While there are plenty of stories about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, little evidence supports his existence. If he did exist, who was he? Historians have pondered the existence of King Arthur for decades, even centuries, and it appears that we are far from uncovering the truth. Number 4. The term mutually assured destruction was first coined in the 1960s at the height of the Cold War. The phrase is based on the principle of retaliation. If one nation fires a nuclear weapon or missile, the opposite nation will do the same. Doing so would create an end time for the planet, and two countries willing to use nuclear weapons simultaneously would have disastrous results. While we've come close to MAD, nobody has pressed the button yet. Or have we? There are those out there that believe we've seen MAD before. The theory states that the beginning of Earth as we know it may have resulted from MAD. We know of the theory that the Big Bang created the universe. So what if that bang resulted from nuclear weapons? Tektite is a small, glassy piece of debris that's made in the presence of nuclear fission. According to those who believe in this theory, pieces of tektite were found following the New Mexico nuclear weapons tests in 1945. Pieces of this bizarre debris have been found worldwide in Syria, Iraq, and the Philippines. Believers have also put forth scholarly articles to support their theories. According to reports, a text which is over 3,000 years old mentions a blazing missile that created a smokeless fire, just like a nuclear weapon. The text describes the incident in detail, many believing that this is solid evidence that the planet has already seen mutually assured destruction. While the evidence is shaky at best, it's an interesting theory, so what are your thoughts? Number 3. 11/22/63, the day the Earth stood still. John F. Kennedy was the first Catholic to take the presidential office in the United States, and many connected with his laid-back, gentle approach to politics. Kennedy had just as many supporters as he did rivals, and over the years, hundreds if not thousands of theories have popped up surrounding his final days. 2023 marks the 60th anniversary of what went down on that grassy knoll, yet it remains one of the most significant events in US history. One thing that's bothered conspiracy theorists is the little old woman dressed in a scarf. Footage of that November day is available online and in archives and has been seen by millions worldwide. Almost everyone knows the basic conspiracy theory about JFK and how the government or Secret Service took him out, but the theory goes much deeper than that. In the infamous footage, a woman wearing a headscarf is seen holding a camera, watching the chaos unfold. In every photo taken of her, she had carefully obscured her face as if she didn't want to be seen. In the event's aftermath, the police asked the Babushka Lady to come forward, as she had caught the entire event on film and may have filmed crucial evidence. The Babushka Lady never came forward, although many stories surrounding her identity began to float around. In the months after JFK's passing, conspiracy theories began to surface pointing to the Babushka Lady. Many believed that she was somehow involved and that her camera was perhaps a weapon or used as a signal. Some also believed that the Babushka Lady was a CIA operative or with another mysterious agency that wanted to eliminate JFK. Many women have claimed to be the infamous Babushka Lady over the years, but her identity remains a mystery. Was the Babushka Lady an innocent bystander who wanted to take photos of JFK, or was there something much darker at play? Number 2. In 1985, Ken and Debbie Webster bought their dream home, an 18th century cottage called Meadow Cottage in Dawdleston, England. The home was a dream come true for the pair, and the minute they were handed the keys, they began renovating. Everything was going smoothly for the couple until they discovered bizarre six-toed footprints that walked along the walls. The two brushed it off and continued to paint over them. The next day, Ken and Debbie were horrified to discover that the footprints had made a return. The pair tried to continue renovating their dream home, but with each day that passed, things worsened. Large gusts of wind blew through the cottage, and the two were disturbed when they discovered cat food tins neatly piled into a pyramid. Shortly after moving in, Ken brought home a microcomputer, an early prototype of the computers that we use today. One evening, as the pair were getting ready to settle down for the night, Ken saw a message on the computer. Ken asked Debbie if she'd been using the computer, but chillingly she said no. The message read, quote, "I write on behalf of many. What strange words you speak. You are a worthy, good man who has a fanciful woman, and you live in my house with the lights which the devil makes. It was a great crime to have stolen my house. L.W." The author was clearly infuriated at Ken and Debbie for stealing their house, but Ken and Debbie had no idea who the author could be. For months, the messages continued, and the author, who identified himself as Thomas Harden or Howarden, continued to harass Debbie and Ken for stealing his home. Eventually, in mid-1986, Thomas stopped writing via the computer, telling the couple they had forced him from his land. Several paranormal investigators were called to investigate Meadow Cottage, but nobody has ever gotten to the bottom of the mysterious Dawdleston messages. Number 1. Between 249 and 251 BC, the Emperor of Ephesus in Turkey attempted to phase Christianity out. He set about making rules and laws to prevent Christians from practicing in favor of paganism and paganistic rituals. 7 men, among others, were unhappy with this new ruling. The men continued to practice their faith and moved around the city of Ephesus to avoid capture. After being chased through slums and streets, the 7 men decided to take refuge in a cave on a mountain. Here, the men could pray and practice freely. According to legend, the men became unnaturally sleepy and fell into a deep slumber. The emperor heard of their new location and told his soldiers to seal up the entrance of the cave. The 7 men stayed in their deep slumber, finally waking after what they thought was many hours later. There are different iterations of how the cave became unsealed, but when the men ventured outside, they found that the world they knew had disappeared. They tried to buy food, but their coins were useless and had been out of circulation for many years. Legend has it that the men awoke sometime between 408 and 450 BC. The 7 men are said to have passed away, but the tale of their slumber and awakening has lived on ever since. Historians and anthropologists have studied the story of the 7 sleepers, and the verdict is still out. Were these men really able to sleep for almost 200 years while sealed in a cave? 39-year-old Jessica Christine Sable was last seen in Arlington, Texas on December 12, 2017. On the day she disappeared, she video called her mother, telling her she was with a man who creeped her out. She explained that she was terrified as the man had her car keys and they were at the Angel of Winds casino. Jessica also texted several other people, telling them that she was scared by the man she was with. She never told them exactly who she was with. After this incident, Jessica was never seen or heard from again. Jessica's parents reported her missing to the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office, and an investigation was launched. Investigators and Jessica's boyfriend visited the last address Jessica had given via text before she disappeared. When they arrived, they found Jessica's car, and the woman at the address that sits close to the Stillaguamish River told investigators that Jessica had given her the car. In 2022, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office received a new tip leading them back to the Trafton Arlington property along the Stillaguamish River. This new tip stated that Jessica was buried somewhere on the property. A search of the property has been conducted, but so far no evidence has been found. Ground-penetrating radar was also used in the search, but there was too much debris to get a clear image. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Ted Betts of the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office at 425-388-3839, quoting case number 2017-193-001. Number 9. 26-year-old Risha Alina Lewis spent the evening of January 20th, 2006 at her friend's home on Pulaski Highway in Elkton, Maryland. The two chatted into the early morning hours until Risha decided it was time to head home. The two friends said their goodbyes, but this would be the last time Risha was ever seen alive. After leaving her friend's home, Risha jumped into her white 1997 Ford Crown Victoria and began the 40-mile journey to Newcastle, Delaware. According to Risha's family, she called at around 1:30 a.m. to let them know she was coming back. Risha's parents waited to hear the familiar sound of her car pulling into the driveway, but the night remained silent. When Risha failed to return home, she was reported missing to the Newcastle County Police Department. Few details are known about the investigation. On October 17, 2006, Risha's beloved 1997 Ford Crown Victoria was found abandoned in Newark, Delaware, 12 miles from her Morehouse Drive, Newcastle home. Risha's parents commented that it was out of character for Risha to leave unannounced, and they did not believe that she would abandon her two children. There's been little coverage of Risha's disappearance, and bizarrely, her phone is still activated but remains unused. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Newcastle County Police Department at 302-573-2800, quoting case number 3206-009-498. Number 8. 46-year-old Regine Joseph Bowman, who went by Patrick, had been diagnosed with several mental health disorders. In 2005, Patrick lived with his dad in New York. Patrick often struggled to manage his conditions of bipolar disorder and paranoid schizophrenia, and self-medicated with substances. Patrick was last seen on April 15, 2005 at around 3:30 a.m., leaving his home on Route 42 and Crier Lane in Kiamesha, New York. According to reports, Patrick was headed to Dunkin' Donuts, telling his dad he wanted a cup of coffee. Patrick has never been seen since, and his family are incredibly concerned for his welfare. He was reported missing to the Sullivan County Sheriff's Department, and during their initial investigation, they discovered that Patrick had disappeared with a bottle of Ambien. Multiple searches have been conducted, but none of them have been successful. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office at 845-794-7100, quoting case number 2005-0838. Number 7. 27-year-old Robert Anthony Spellman was last seen in Sherman Oaks, California on April 12, 2005 by a family he was visiting. The following day, Robert failed to show up for a family event, and his parents attempted to report him missing to the Los Angeles Police Department. According to his parents, the LAPD were indifferent and refused to take the report seriously. His parents conducted their own search and visited the apartment that he had rented. According to reports, Robert had also placed a bid on the property to buy it, but this deal fell through. Bizarrely, his landlord served him with an eviction notice on April 12th. The notice was served after Robert allegedly failed to pay rent. Robert's parents described him as an organized and responsible person and found it odd that he had not paid rent. When they visited his apartment, it was in a state of disarray, something that was unusual for the neat and tidy Robert. According to the Los Angeles Daily News, the LAPD did not take the case seriously until June 28, 2005. 2 months after Robert disappeared, investigators were finally sent to his rented apartment, but no clues were uncovered. Robert's parents filed a complaint with the LAPD for their negligence and refusal to investigate, but an internal investigation found that there was no wrongdoing. To add to his parents' anguish, Robert's case was shelved and forgotten about. Only at their insistence was the case passed over to another department. In Robert's case, little progress has been made, and his family has since hired a private investigator. Robert's landlord told the LAPD that he'd visited her office 2 weeks after his disappearance, something his parents have refused. There's currently a $50,000 reward for information. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Los Angeles Police Department's Adult Missing Persons Unit at 877-275-5273, quoting case number 0510-18048. Number 6. 84-year-old Yan Seichao disappeared on July 3, 2005 in Redding, California. At the time of her disappearance, temperatures in California had reached a soaring 28 degrees Celsius, making her even more vulnerable. According to reports, Yan was last seen leaving her home at Camelot Court in St. Mark's in Redding at around 7 a.m. Investigators believe she may have been headed for Lake Boulevard, close to train tracks, although this has never been confirmed. Yan was reported missing hours later by her concerned family. Unfortunately, there's little information about her disappearance and the subsequent investigation. There have been no breakthroughs, and she remains missing to this day. If still alive today, Yan would be 102 years old. Yan Seichao is described as an Asian female with graying black hair, brown eyes, 4'10" and 120 pounds. She may have been suffering from dementia at the time of her disappearance and had been complaining of chest pains. Anyone with information is asked to contact Jennifer Coonfield of the Reading Police Department at 530-225-4200, quoting case number 05-42869. Number 5. 40-year-old Scott William Dusa and his wife had recently gotten divorced in June of 2005. The marriage didn't work out, but the two were determined to co-parent and create a safe and loving environment for their son. On June 29, 2005, Scott's wife left home and headed to work. At the time, Scott was still living at home, opting to sleep on the sofa. But when she returned home that evening, she was shocked to find their son alone. When she asked where his dad had gone, the child replied that Scott had left their Monroe, Michigan home between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. that afternoon. Their son also added that Scott had gone for a bike ride, something he had never done before. Scott was reported missing to the Monroe County Sheriff's Office later that evening, and investigators found Scott's keys and wallet still in the home. The prevailing theory is that Scott left of his own accord. Months after he disappeared, the Monroe County Sheriff's Office received a tip that Scott was living in northern Michigan. This tip has never been verified. Scott's family are still trying to get their heads around his disappearance almost 20 years later. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Monroe County Sheriff's Office at 734-240-7700, quoting case number 2995805. Number 4. On June 20th, 2005, a boy was found abandoned outside of the First Baptist Church on 112th Street in Parkland, Washington. Thankfully, the child was unharmed and had a cheeseburger and a cup of water beside him. Investigators immediately set about tracking down his parents, and this is when the case of Pamela Quitch began to unravel. The boy's father, Robert Dalton Tuckson, told investigators a strange story. He claimed that on June 19, 2005, he and his girlfriend and the mother of the child, Pamela Quitch, had gotten into an argument. Following the argument, Pamela took her son and left, presumably for her parents' house. Robert also told investigators he had no idea his girlfriend was missing, or that his son had been abandoned. Investigators didn't believe Robert's story, but they didn't have enough evidence to suggest that foul play had occurred. Pamela's parents said that it wasn't unusual for her to go away for days at a time, but they knew that she would never abandon her son. Pamela's case quickly went cold, and she was assigned to another team within the Pierce County Sheriff's Office. In 2010, Robert was arrested and charged with taking the life of a man named Zachariah Wright. Investigators in Pamela's case decided to take another look, but no evidence has surfaced. Anyone with information is asked to contact Stephanie Blair of the Pierce County Sheriff's Office at 253-798-7530, quoting case number 050-171-092. Number 3. According to reports, 23-year-old Eric Dwayne Blevins was last seen on June 29, 2005, in Selma, Alabama. The last confirmed sighting of Eric made by the family came on July 23, 2005, when he left his cousin's Lamar Avenue home. Eric was reported days later when he failed to contact his family. His family don't believe he left of his own accord, but he was due to enroll in truck driving school in early August. It's uncharacteristic for Eric to leave without telling anyone, and his family are concerned for his welfare. On the day of his disappearance, it's believed Eric was headed for a friend's house at Merrimack Apartments in Selma, Alabama. If still alive today, Eric would be 41 years old. Eric Dwayne Blevins is described as a black male with black hair and brown eyes, 5'8" to 5'10" and 140 to 155 pounds. Anyone with information is asked to contact Sergeant Evelyn Gant of the Selma Police Department at 334-375-1708, quoting case number 0508-15017. Number 2. 57-year-old Sandra L Spoon was last seen by her family on August 28, 2005. That evening, Sandra left her house and headed to a friend's apartment on Pearl Street in Joplin, Missouri. While there, Sandra was pestered by an upstairs neighbor, Edward G. Monroe, who allegedly made several unwanted advances toward her. Sandra politely rejected Edward, and the evening continued. At around 10 p.m., Sandra left her friend's apartment, but before she could leave the block, she came upon Edward. Edward claims he offered Sandra a ride home, which she accepted. In Edward's version of events, he claims to have dropped Sandra off just a block from her home. However, witness statements contradict this account. A witness later came forward to tell police officers that on the night that Sandra disappeared, Edward had boasted that he was about to spend the night with Sandra. Between 2 and 4 hours after dropping Sandra off, Edward returned to the apartment on Pearl Street. Edward was a suspect in Sandra's disappearance from the get-go, but officers could never uncover enough evidence to arrest him. Unfortunately, Edward Monroe passed away in 2007, taking his secrets to the grave. Investigators are now appealing to anyone with information to come forward and bring Sandra's family the closure and justice they deserve. There's currently a $1,000 reward for information, and anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Sergeant Andy Blair of the Joplin Police Department at 417-623-3131, quoting case number 05-42684. Number 1. 23-year-old Emily Victoria Hoyt was described as a kind and sensitive young woman. While not working, Emily could often be found making music or scuba diving. Her entire family adored her. In December of 2005, Emily was living with her boyfriend, who was 20 years her senior, in Highland Beach, Florida. Her parents described their relationship as troubled, and Emily had little support as they lived in Kansas, Missouri, and Oregon. In December of 2005, Emily called her brother to discuss the upcoming Christmas holiday. She told her family in December that she was planning to leave her boyfriend and would likely return home. Emily was never heard from following that final phone call with her brother in December. Her parents tried to report her missing when she failed to contact them over Christmas, but the Highland Beach Police Department refused to take a report. When questioned, Emily's boyfriend told her parents he had kicked Emily out in December and had taken her phone. At the time of her disappearance, Emily had no phone, no car, or money. Her boyfriend also added he believed she went to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. It took over 18 months for Emily's family to persuade the Highland Beach police to file a missing person report. By the time an investigation was launched, most of the critical evidence was gone. Decades have passed without answers, and Emily's family are determined to get them. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office at 561-688-3000, quoting case number 09133-771. Christopher Columbus is one of the most prominent and controversial figures in history. In the late 1400s, Christopher proposed a plan to the Spanish monarchy to sail through the Atlantic Ocean to find the New World. Europeans had been searching for the New World for many years, and had grand plans to capture and colonize the areas. When these attempts mainly failed, Christopher was given the green light. For those educated in the US, Christopher's story will be familiar. However, in the UK, his voyage is largely glossed over. In the late 1400s, Christopher successfully reached the New World, reaching South America and the Caribbean islands. The rest is history. Other ships soon followed, and the colonization of North America began. In 1504, Christopher returned to Spain due to ill health. Just 2 years later, Christopher passed away. One of the most revered figures of the time commanded a significant burial and funeral, and that's precisely what the Spanish monarchy afforded him. Christopher's first burial was in Spain, the place where he had passed. Shortly after, his remains were moved, which should have been his final resting spot. Decades later, his remains were shipped to modern-day Dominican Republic and placed in a grand cathedral. Christopher's son, Diego, kept track of his father's remains, but wanted them to remain in Seville. His remains would stay in the Dominican Republic until 1795. This time, he was carted off to Cuba. Every country wanted to be the one who held the remains of Christopher Columbus. But this is where the mystery begins. In the late 1800s, Christopher's remains were moved for a final time back to Seville, Spain. But did the remains actually belong to him? There have been many controversies over the years, and a discovery in 1877 changed everything. According to reports, construction workers at the Santo Domingo Cathedral in the Dominican Republic found a box marked Illustrious and Distinguished Male Don Cristobal Colon. This discovery brought into question the actual final burial place of Columbus. Had the wrong remains been sent to Spain in the late 1800s? In 2006, the remains in Seville underwent DNA testing, but according to the BBC, these results were inconclusive. A DNA sample had been obtained from Christopher's brother, but researchers couldn't be 100% sure that the remains belonged to Christopher's brother. A DNA sample was also obtained from his son, but the results were inconclusive. The DNA test showed a familial match, but it's never been proven. The Dominican Republic and Spain, along with other countries, are still fighting over who holds the remains of Christopher Columbus. Did the remains found in the 1800s belong to Christopher, or is he buried in Seville as his family wished? Number 9. The Sintoshda culture is believed to have existed from 2200 to 1900 BC in modern-day Russia. The Sintoshda people are also believed to have spread further east into the country's harshest parts and even Kazakhstan. Archaeological evidence has shown that the Sintoshda culture was deeply embedded in metallurgy, and their culture depended upon bronze and copper. Many tools and instruments used bronze, and their burial sites have continued to fascinate archaeologists. During excavations, archaeologists found signs that the Sintoshda people used chariots, despite the harsh landscapes they occupied. This discovery has changed how experts think about chariots, as they were believed to have been invented in the Middle East. There's also another question that plagues archaeologists. What happened to the Sintoshda culture? Archaeological evidence suggested that the people melted into other cultures and societies around them. Scientists propose that due to the movement of people east, the Sintoshda blended in to create a melting pot of cultures in what is now modern-day Russia. Number 8. In 1864, archaeologist Paul Hérault made a stunning discovery. Paul was in fact an amateur archaeologist who had no idea that his humble discovery would have such an enormous impact on the world. While digging in France, Paul came across a small figurine. The figurine was of a woman with large breasts and hips. Experts were called to investigate, and it's believed that the statues were made to portray the female symbol of fertility. Over the coming years, hundreds of other figurines, similar in size and shape, would be discovered across Europe, even as far as Asia. The figurines were dated as far back as 40,000 BC, to the Paleolithic period. Many experts called the dolls Venus figurines, as they believed they represented Venus, the ancient Greek goddess of love. Experts agreed that the statues represented the female body and fertility in some way. These figurines and their impact on societies around them have been pondered, but to this day, nobody knows their significance or purpose. Number 7. In 1968, a diver exploring off the coast of North Bimini Island in the Bahamas made a stunning discovery. As they dove 18 feet below the water's surface, they were greeted with what appeared to be a wall. The diver immediately summoned others to the area, and a full exploration began. Scientists discovered that the wall, now called Bimini Road, stretches over 457 meters. The wall comprises 13-foot tall rocks that run in a straight line before curving off into a hook. Divers also found 2 similar smaller walls nearby. When the discovery of the Bimini Wall was made public, people ran wild with ideas. Conspiracy theories popped up left and right and center. The most prominent theory was that Bimini Road was actually the road to the infamously lost city of Atlantis. Many years later, the gigantic rocks were carbon dated, and scientists discovered that the wall had occurred naturally. There were no tool marks, but this didn't stop people from speculating. Many years on, nobody knows the truth behind the infamous Bimini Road. Number 6. In 2017, archaeologists flocked to northwestern Saudi Arabia to study the bizarre Attila Ruins. The ruins had first been discovered in the 1970s, but there was little interest in deciphering the mystery then. Eventually in 2017, the mystery was picked back up and has continued to baffle experts to this day. The Mustatil, which means rectangle in Arabic, is a large rectangular ruin with long courtyards. According to reports, these Mustatil measure anywhere from 65 to 2,000 feet long and 4 feet high. The stones used to construct the grand features can weigh up to 1,100 pounds, so who built them and why? Experts are also puzzled by the how. How did an ancient society move such large stones without the help of modern technologies like cranes? Dozens of Mustatils line the landscapes of Saudi Arabia, and despite much research, nobody has been able to establish who built them. Experts believe that these structures may have been used as homes due to the presence of animal bones. These bones are estimated to be over 6,000 years old. Some experts date the Mustatils back to 6,000 BC, while others state that they're 4,000 to 3,000 BC. The debate about their age is still ongoing, but scientists are still scrambling to figure out who inhabited these magnificent structures and why. Number 5. In the 10th century, many powerful kings were coming to be. New eras were being created, and King Gorm is known as being one of the most prominent kings in Danish history. Gorm would go on to raise 2 sons, who would become kings themselves. While the sons are widely discussed, the reign of King Gorm has largely been forgotten. King Gorm ruled with an iron fist and took no prisoners. His reign was one of violence and brutality. He had no problem intimidating his opponents and subjects to get what he wanted. If there was a region that he wanted, he took it by force, giving his opponents little breathing room. Peasants in Denmark had no option but to adore their new king, and when his time came, he was afforded a significant burial. Years earlier, he had constructed a large burial mound. When he passed away, his son placed a runic stone at the mound, telling everyone that the great King Gorm was buried there. But there's one problem. No sign of King Gorm's body has ever been found at the burial pit. Hundreds of other bodies litter the site, but archaeologists are yet to find his body. So where is it? There are no jewels, crowns, or artifacts that would point in his direction, and with a lack of historical records, historians are at a loss. It's possible that the king was buried elsewhere, but without records, it's hard to discern. New methods have been applied to the mound, but as of 2023, the final resting place of King Gorm remains a mystery. Number 4. The SS Andrea Doria held a reputation of prestige and luxury. The 697-foot-long ocean liner made numerous journeys through the Mediterranean Ocean and into northern Europe. In 1956, the boat's reputation fell into disrepute, following a disaster that is still hotly debated to this day. By July 25, 1956, the SS Andrea Doria was 8 days into its 9-day voyage. The boat left Italy on July 17th and headed for New York City. On board were 1,134 passengers, most traveling to the US in search of the American dream. On the evening of July 25th, SS Andrea Doria reached the northwest US. Also in the waters was a Swedish ship traveling from New York to Gothenburg. The 2 ships were on a collision course, yet controllers thought that the 2 ships were heading around one another. At around 11:15 p.m., the 2 ships collided and the damage seemed minimal at first. That was until crews went below deck and saw that water was spilling in from the collision site. The force of water was too strong to stop, and the ship's captain ordered lifeboats to be deployed. Unfortunately, the response came too late for some, and they were whisked off into the ocean. An hour later, a passing ship responded to the incident, taking aboard as many stranded passengers as possible. Rescue crews worked into the early morning hours, but not everyone could be saved. In total, 51 people lost their lives due to the collision and ensuing chaos. Eventually, the SS Andrea Doria capsized, sending the ship into the murky waters below. Captains of both vessels were quick to blame one another for the crash. How had they not spotted each other on their radars? And how had the controllers also failed? Blame was tossed around like a hot potato, but nobody wanted to take responsibility. To this day, the exact cause and fault of the SS Andrea Doria's sinking has not been determined. In the years since the disaster, divers have been sent to investigate the area, and sadly, some of the divers have even lost their lives. Number 3. In India, there are 4 mysterious caves called the Barabar Caves. These are believed to be the oldest surviving rock-cut caves in India, but inside, a mystery brews. The Barabar Caves is a collective name for 4 caves named after kings or prominent rulers. Scientists discovered that the impressively large caves are hand-carved from granite and rock. One cave has been dated back as far as 245 BC, and each cave holds many secrets for archaeologists to uncover. Some of the caves have polished walls that make it look like it's filled with mirrors. These caves are believed to be prominent in spiritual practices and held significance within the corresponding cultures. But one thing historians need help to figure out is why these caves were carved from solid rock. Another aspect of the caves that baffles archaeologists and experts alike is the polished walls. This would have required great skill and likely advanced technologies. Were the Mayas a more advanced civilization than first thought? Or is there something profound here to be explored? Number 2. The ancient Puebloans of 100 to 1600 AD are considered to be a prehistoric Native American civilization. Evidence has shown that the Puebloans lived in modern-day Utah, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Nevada, and inhabited national parks and forest areas. Around 1600, the ancient Puebloans disappeared, dropping off the map altogether, and nobody can figure out why. The ancient Puebloans weren't just an agricultural society, but an advanced one. According to reports, their society also focused on architecture, building 5-story-high homes from mud and stone. These homes often sat together, forming large spaces teeming with hundreds of people. The ancient Puebloans valued a strong society, with most people living together and attending various cultural events and centers. The ancient society started strong. However, natural disasters slowly began to erode them away. Extensive evidence of droughts in the area is thought to have played a significant role in the fall of the Puebloans. Like most ancient societies, many fled the area in search of food, water, and shelter, decimating the society they had built. While natural disasters likely played a role, nobody is 100% sure why the society fell or why people fled. Number 1. At the Montecepe Chapel, located in Italy, there lies a sword in the stone. When we think of a sword in the stone, we may think of fables and fairy tales of knights and noblemen desperately trying to be the ones strong enough to lift the sword and come out on top. According to legend, the sword trapped in the stone at Montecepe Chapel belonged to Saint Guidati, although little evidence supports this theory. According to historical records, Saint Guidati, who became a saint late in life, was once a brave knight at the infamous Round Table. Unfortunately, Guidati's ruthless behavior saw him removed from the group. After being kicked out, Guidati lost his way until he heard an angel's voice telling him to repent and seek God. Guidati initially ignored the angel, but the angel persisted. Legend has it that when he reached Montecepe, Guidati tried to split a large rock with his sword, and instead of splitting or damaging the stone, the sword slid right in. From that moment on, Guidati placed his faith in God and became reformed. Guidati desperately tried to retrieve his sword, but it was useless. Instead of trying to remove the sword, Guidati used it as a place to pray and to reflect on the angel that had spoken to him. In 1181, Guidati passed away and was then made a saint. The Montecepe Chapel was built around the sword, as villagers believed it to be a sign from God. The chapel was flooded with visitors, hoping to see the sword. Some even wanted to touch it to become closer to God. While the legend of Guidati persists to this day, no evidence suggests the sword truly belonged to him. Who the sword actually belongs to is a centuries-old mystery, and just like the fairy tales and folklore, it's proved impossible to remove. The sword now stands as a symbol of God and his divine powers. On July 26, 1909, the SSwaratah left Durban headed for Cape Town. The ship had sailed from Australia and was in the final leg of its trip. The gigantic ship had made the journey once before, and those on board were confident that it would be smooth sailing. The ship carried 211 passengers and cargo, as the ship was designed for shipping. When the boat left the port, the passengers waved goodbye to those on shore, not knowing that it would be the last time they would ever be seen alive. By July 27th, the ship had made good progress and was slowly entering the ocean. Passengers on board were merry and passed the time by eating, drinking, and chatting. Early that morning, the SSwaratah passed the Clan McIntyre, another shipping boat. Eventually, the Waratah sailed out of sight of Clan McIntyre, close to the Banshee River. At 9:30 a.m., they sailed into the horizon, hoping for smooth seas ahead, but instead, they got a hurricane. Hours later, the SSwaratah had drifted off track. Harsh winds and even harsher waters mercilessly bashed the ship around. Those on board quickly descended below deck to seek shelter, but it was too late. The shipping boat could not handle the tumultuous weather. The SSwaratah disappeared, likely sinking due to the bad weather. When the SSwaratah failed to make contact or arrive at its destination, a search party was sent out. Numerous searches for the ship were conducted, but none were successful. Dozens of reported sightings came to authorities, but none have ever been confirmed. The SSwaratah and its hundreds of passengers and crew disappeared into the vast ocean. Underwater searches have since been conducted, but no wreckage of the SSwaratah has ever been found. Experts are still trying to understand what happened to the SSwaratah and how a ship could disappear, leaving no wreckage or survivors behind. Number 9. Jeremy Thorpe was once considered an esteemed MP or Member of Parliament for the British Liberal Party. Jeremy stood out amongst his Liberal peers. He'd received a top-notch education at Oxford University, but found that his political ideas sided more with those in the working class. In the late 1970s, Jeremy's outstanding career would come crashing down when he was in the center of a bizarre hit-for-hire scandal that would rock a nation. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Jeremy worked hard to rise through the ranks of the Liberal Party. His charm and charisma made him a great candidate for leadership, and those alive at the time remember his extensive campaign trails. In 1967, Jeremy was elected as leader of the Liberal Party, a position he'd been dreaming of for years. Jeremy's life would take an even better turn a year later when he married his sweetheart, Carolyn Alpass. The marriage bore a son, but the joy was short-lived. 2 years later, Carolyn was involved in a car accident that took her life. In 1973, Jeremy would remarry to Marion Stein, a powerful and influential woman. Once again, all seemed perfect in the Thorpe household, but Jeremy was hiding a secret. He was gay. Jeremy would often meet with men throughout London for encounters. One man in particular, Norman Scott, caught his eye. In the late 60s, same-sex relationships had just been decriminalized in the UK, but attitudes towards gay men were still stuck in the past. Jeremy knew that being outed as gay would ruin his career. Jeremy became paranoid that the closer he got to leadership, the more his position was in jeopardy due to Norman. The two frequently sent each other love letters, and Jeremy was terrified that these would be intercepted and released. In 1975, Jeremy reached a boiling point. His paranoia and hysteria had whipped him into a frenzy. In October of that year, Jeremy allegedly asked two close friends, Peter Bessel and David Holmes, to get rid of his problem. Bessel and Holmes then allegedly outsourced the job to Andrew Newton, an airline pilot. According to the BBC, Bessel and Holmes found Newton when he was exceptionally intoxicated, following a binge of 16 drinks. They offered him £10,000 to get the job done. Newton agreed, and the payment meant for Newton was funneled through several channels of the party before reaching his hands. Newton ambushed Norman, but he was able to get away. Unfortunately, Norman's dog wasn't as lucky. Norman immediately reported the encounter to the police, and a gigantic scandal ensued. The British press focused more on Jeremy's homosexuality than the fact that he had paid someone to take out Norman Scott. The trial was salacious and sensational, and the press fought with one another to get front row seats. Andrew Newton, the man who had pulled the trigger, received just 2 years in prison. Jeremy Thorpe was acquitted, with the judge commenting that he was hysterical and under much pressure. Jeremy Thorpe would continue to maintain his innocence, but the British public is convinced that Jeremy orchestrated the entire ordeal. It remains a mystery whether Jeremy was the mastermind behind the whole plan. Jeremy Thorpe passed away in 2014. Following the scandal, he was removed from the Liberal Party and his reputation was destroyed. Number 8. 44-year-old Shelva Jean Raft of Nicholson, Pennsylvania, was described as a kind and loving woman. Shelva had an exceptionally close bond with her sister, Joanne Decker, and her daughter, Janelle. May 28th of 2006 was a day of celebration for Shelva and her daughter, Janelle, as they were celebrating her graduation. Joanne had agreed to hold the graduation party at her house, and dozens of family members turned up to celebrate. Unfortunately, the happy day would be marked by tragedy, and decades later, her family is still fighting for answers. On May 28, 2006, Shelva, Joanne, Janelle, and countless other family members celebrated the graduation at Joanne's house. That evening, Joanne and her on-again, off-again boyfriend, John Parra, argued. According to Shelva's sister, Joanne, the relationship was tumultuous, and Shelva told her sister that if anything ever happened to her, John would be the one to blame. She also added that she knew too much but refused to elaborate. Shelva and John had broken up before the party, but John was, for some reason, invited to the party by Shelva. At 10:30 p.m., Shelva and John were seen arguing before leaving for John's house. According to John, the two made it home, but the argument continued until around 1 a.m. when Shelva left on foot to walk home. After this, Shelva was never seen or heard from again. Shelva's family immediately noted her absence and reported her missing to the Pittston City Police Department. A search of Shelva's apartment, around a mile from John's apartment, showed no clues. As reported by the Charlie Project, Shelva's TV was still on, doors were locked, and her car was still there. Investigators believed that Shelva had taken off on her own. She was familiar with truck stops and truckers. While her daughter Janelle postulates that her mom may have gotten a ride with a trucker, the rest of Shelva's family does not believe she would abandon her children. John Para has never been named as a suspect, and Shelva's case has since gone cold. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Pittston City Police Department at 570-654-0513, quoting case number 1092. Number 7. In 1914, the SS Bachimo made its maiden voyage from Gothenburg, Sweden. A German company purchased the ship and began sailing to and from Germany and Sweden. The SS Bachimo was an invaluable asset in World War I. However, we all know how that ended for Germany. The SS Bachimo became the property of the British and was sent on a new path between England, Scotland, and Canada. The new route provided a new level of difficulty for the SS Bachimo and her crew. The crew were not acclimated to the ice and snow of Canada and Alaska, but they persisted. That was until October 1931, when the crew faced a particularly harsh winter. The SS Bachimo became stuck in the ice twice, and the crew abandoned the ship the second time around. They knew there was no hope of setting the boat free or surviving the harsh sub-zero temperatures. The crew alighted in Alaska and set up camp. Over the coming weeks, the crew ferried back and forth between their makeshift camp close to Barrow and the SS Bachimo. The fierce Alaskan winter raged on, and by November of 1931, the captain ordered everyone to abandon ship. A large storm had blown in, and survival and escape were deemed impossible. When the storm had settled, the crew tried to locate the SS Bachimo, but she was gone. The assumption was that she had sunken into the icy depths below, but this would soon be disproven. The crew returned to Vancouver and began looking for their next expedition. Weeks later, reported sightings of the SS Bachimo came in. Over the years, many claimed to have seen the ghost ship trapped in ice or floating across the ocean. The final sighting of the SS Bachimo was made in 1969. After that, it simply dropped off the map. What happened to the SS Bachimo and why there were so many reports of a ghost ship off the coast of Alaska remains unknown. Number 6. At 18 years old, Jennifer Apreciado was described as a sensible and responsible young woman. Jennifer had a boyfriend, and the two were in the middle of making college plans. On October 26, 2006, Jennifer visited her boyfriend's house. At 3 p.m., she left his home and walked a short distance to the Wall and General McMullen bus stop in San Antonio. Jennifer had made this journey several times before, and there was no concern for her safety. Jennifer noticed a car following her as she walked down Arizona Avenue and 19th Street towards the bus stop. The car slowly circled the block and watched Jennifer intently. She called her boyfriend in a panic, with him reassuring her that everything was fine. Jennifer promised to call when she made it home safely, but her boyfriend's phone remained silent for the next hour. When 4 p.m. came and there was no call from Jennifer, he decided to call her. The call went through and someone answered, but it wasn't Jennifer. At the other end of the phone, the woman told Jennifer's boyfriend that she'd found the phone on the street. Moments later, Jennifer was reported missing to the San Antonio Police Department. Unfortunately, Jennifer didn't identify the car or its driver in her initial call to her boyfriend. Since her disappearance, there's been little movement in her case, and any details of the investigation remain hidden. Anyone with information is asked to contact Detective Donna Wilburn of the San Antonio Police Department at 210-207-7660, quoting case number 06885-642. Number 5. On August 21, 1955, The Suttons of Hopkinsville, Kentucky experienced an event that nobody has ever been able to explain. Late that evening, they ran to the Hopkinsville Police Department requesting urgent help. The Suttons claimed to have been mobbed by a group of otherworldly beings. The police went out to the ranch to investigate, but the story of the Hopkinsville Goblins remains unsolved to this day. According to Billy Ray Taylor, who was staying with the Suttons that evening, he was out fetching water when a large silver disc flew overhead and landed in the field. He told the police that the exhaust from the UFO was a bright rainbow color, which distracted him from the landing. Then the door to the craft opened and out popped aliens. Billy and the Suttons described the creatures as 3.5 feet tall, with large glowing eyes and long gangly arms. The aliens were not there to make peace though, with one of the tiny creatures setting its sights on Billy. In the original account, Billy claimed that one of the aliens jumped onto him and ran its claws through its hair. The Suttons were whipped up into a frenzy by this point and began running around and screaming. Luckily, the family were able to ward off the bizarre creatures and they ran off into the night. The attack was colossal news within the community and quickly became a sensational story. The Suttons could never put forth any definitive evidence, and many in the community called them out for it. As the years have passed, the Hopkinsville Goblins story has melded into Kentucky folklore. The question remains, did the Suttons really see aliens that night, or was it all a hoax for attention and money? Number 4. 34-year-old Donald Messier was at a transitional period in his life. In early 2006, Donald's marriage had broken down, sending him into a deep depression. Donald's depression was so bad that he was hospitalized for a period and given intensive treatment. By October of 2006, things were starting to look better for Donnie, as friends affectionately knew him. On October 14th or 15th, Donnie attended a party in Waitsfield, Vermont. According to those present, Donnie was in good spirits and didn't appear intoxicated. The night carried on with people partying. At around 2 a.m., Donnie said his goodbyes, hopped into his red 97 Ford F-150 and drove away. This would be the last time Donnie was ever seen or heard from again. Donnie was reported missing 3 days later, on October 18th, by his family, who were notified that he'd failed to show up to work for several days in a row. This was out of character for Donnie, and their panic was compounded when he was unreachable by phone. The Vermont State Police took on Donnie's case and searched for him for several days. No sign of Donnie was found during the initial investigation, and investigators feared he may have taken his own life. The case quickly turned cold, and Donnie's family fought to keep his name in the media. In 2022, Adventures with Purpose worked with Donnie's family to perform a search of Winooski River, close to where he was last seen. Within minutes, Adventures with Purpose located Donnie's car using sonar equipment, which was recovered from the river, but here's where things get tricky. While his car was recovered, investigators discovered no human remains inside. So where was Donnie? Some of his personal items were recovered, but so far, there's been no sign of his remains. Donnie's case remains open, but the Vermont State Police have hit another brick wall in their investigation. Anyone with information is asked to contact the Vermont State Police at 802-229-9191, quoting case number 06A304862. Number 3. 67-year-old Glenver Glenn Keith Osborne was last seen on March 2nd, 2006, at the Weddington Branch Plaza in Coal Run, Kentucky. Earlier that morning, Glenn called his daughter, outlining his plans to buy a new piece of land. His daughter confirmed that her father had written a check for $20,000 and was headed for a local auction. When his daughter tried to reach him later that evening, there was no answer. Days later, Glenn was reported missing to the Kentucky State Police. During their investigation, the KSP discovered that alongside the $20,000 check, Glenn had also withdrawn a substantial amount of money. 4 days after his disappearance, his beloved F-150 was found abandoned at the Weddington Square Shopping Center. A friend of Glenn's came forward and told investigators that on March 2nd, 2006, he had given Glenn a ride at the shopping center. According to his friend, Glenn was headed to meet someone, but the friend didn't know who Glenn was meeting. The friend has been uncooperative with the KSP, and investigators believe Glenn met with foul play, Anyone with information is asked to contact Amos Adkins of the Kentucky State Police at 606-433-7711, quoting case number 09060539. Number 2. Gareth Williams was a modern-day genius. Gareth's first language was Welsh, followed by English. By the time he was 17, he had finished school and had graduated from Bangor University with a math degree. Gareth would then go on to complete his PhD in computer science. He continued to study advanced math even after finishing his degree. His skills and intelligence didn't go unnoticed, and in 2001, he began working at GCHQ in Cheltenham. Gareth's skills were used well, and he worked with top hackers and cryptologists. Gareth loved his job, which finally presented him with a challenge. Those who worked with Gareth described him as kind but private, and when the weekend came, he was more than happy to spend time alone. In 2009, he was recruited to MI6. This was a significant step up in his career, and to the outside world, things seemed perfect. That was until August 22, 2010, when the Metropolitan Police were called to his apartment to perform a welfare check. He had been in the US in August and was due to return to work later that month, but he never came back. When the police entered his apartment, they noticed that it was unusually warm. When officers reached his bathroom, they froze. A small weekend bag laid in the bathtub, and inside it was the body of Gareth. Bizarrely, the key to unlock it lay underneath his body. Investigators attempted to replicate Gareth's bizarre position in the bag, but it was to no avail. A top contortionist was called in, and even they struggled. They tried 300 different ways but could not lock themselves in the bag, lock the padlock, and then slip the key underneath themselves. Perhaps even more bizarre is the outcome of Gareth's post-mortem. The coroner noted that Gareth had passed away due to a lack of oxygen, with no substances found in his body. The police took the coroner's ruling and determined that Gareth had likely accidentally taken his own life while acting out a fantasy. Investigators found adult material on his laptop and ran with this idea. There was no sign of a struggle throughout the apartment and no sign of a break-in. Experts did not come to the same conclusion, but the Metropolitan Police closed the case. Shortly before his passing, Gareth had been investigating an international money laundering scheme, and his family wondered whether somebody had taken him out because he knew too much. Scotland Yard has sided with the police, stating it was an accident, but the British public and Gareth's family are unconvinced. Number 1. 39-year-old Jerry Tang was going through a rough patch. Jerry, his wife, and their 2 children resided at the 700 block of Ashbury Street in San Francisco, California. While Jerry had a good job, he was under immense pressure, which resulted in high stress levels. Jerry also suffered from seizures following a stroke in 2003, and the high stress did not help his condition. He had been prescribed medication to help manage his seizures, but according to his wife, he rarely took it due to the side effects. On November 29, 2005, Jerry spoke to his wife on the phone at 10 a.m. For the remainder of the morning, Jerry browsed the web and answered work emails. At 11:30 a.m., Jerry logged off and walked out of the apartment, never to be seen again. When Jerry's wife returned home to an empty house, she called the San Francisco Police Department. In their initial investigation, the SFPD discovered that Jerry had called in sick that day. There were no clues as to where Jerry could have gone, and he left with just his phone, wallet, keys, and $80. Multiple searches were conducted, but no sign of Jerry has ever been found. According to the Charlie Project, there have been numerous sightings of Jerry in San Francisco, but these have never been confirmed. Investigators believe that Jerry may have also headed to Boston or Pennsylvania. Jerry may be homeless or suffering from amnesia. Almost 20 years on, the San Francisco Police Department is still no closer to solving the case. Anyone with information is asked to contact Sergeant Wendy Bear of the San Francisco Police Department at 415-558-5534, quoting case number 051347730. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.